When humanity first entered the galactic stage, no one took them seriously. Earth was just a pale blue dot in a vast sea of advanced civilizations, their technology rudimentary, their politics chaotic, their species, well, just too human. The Galactic Accord, an alliance of over 50 ancient species, had long established themselves as the pinnacle of intelligence, power, and culture. They looked down on Earth like a quirky child, amusing but beneath notice. When humans made their first formal contact with the Accord, it was almost comical. At the first Galactic Summit, the humans were assigned the smallest and most uncomfortable seats at the table. Alien diplomats smirked and exchanged knowing glances as the humans nervously fumbled with their outdated communication devices. The humans, in turn, tried to speak with authority, though their language was unpolished, their mannerisms awkward. The Accord's members watched with thinly veiled amusement as humans stammered through their speech. "Greetings, galactic partners," a human representative began, his voice shaking just slightly. "We come in peace." The words felt almost too small for the vast room. The Accord members smiled politely, barely hiding their disbelief. They had no doubt that the humans were harmless. This would be a meeting of formality, a quick handshake, and then back to their place on the sidelines of the universe. Across the galaxy, stories of Earth's first contact spread like wildfire. They became the subject of late-night shows in distant star systems. There were memes of humans awkwardly standing at attention in front of towering alien leaders, endless videos of their first attempts to communicate with the galactic database. The human species was now a punchline, laughed at, mimicked, and dismissed as nothing more than a passing curiosity. But as the galaxy laughed, humanity did something that no one expected. They watched, they listened, and they learned. Every slip, every stutter, every awkward gesture was carefully noted. Every insult, no matter how subtle, was logged. The humans saw the jokes. They felt the ridicule. And they took it all in with their usual stubbornness. They weren't blind. They knew they were the joke. But they also knew one thing the galaxy didn't. They weren't done. The first few years on the galactic stage passed in the same manner. Earth's fleet, small and outdated compared to the others, made its way around the galaxy. A group of tourist species, mostly ignored except for the occasional token nod from the more powerful empires. But humans weren't the type to settle for being overlooked. Every failure only fueled them. Every snide remark only sharpened their resolve. No one yet realized what they had underestimated. Humanity was not just a joke. They were a force, and the galaxy had made the mistake of laughing before they understood what humans could become. While the galaxy continued to mock humanity's awkward entrance into the stars, something was quietly shifting on Earth. The humans, though still laughed at, weren't idle. They were resourceful, driven by a deep-rooted instinct to survive, no matter the odds. They didn't have the ancient technologies or centuries of experience that the other galactic species boasted, but they had something that set them apart, their relentless adaptability. Humans had never been good at staying in one place, and space exploration was no different. They began pushing the limits, sending out small ships to the outer rim of known space, where resources were scarce and planets often hostile. The first few missions were filled with disaster. Ships lost communication. Crews disappeared without a trace. But Earth wasn't a species that gave up easily. Then, something changed. A human expedition to a planet on the edge of galactic maps, a world deemed uninhabitable by every other species, made an unexpected return. The planet, designated by the Accord as a dead rock, was the epitome of inhospitable, boiling seas, raging storms, toxic atmospheres. No one had even considered it worth attempting to colonize. Yet when the human crew returned, they weren't empty-handed. They brought back detailed maps of the terrain, new plant species, and a fully functional base. They had done it. They had survived. And not only that, they had thrived. The news spread quickly across the galaxy, and with it came confusion. The aliens thought it was a fluke. How could these fragile humans have done what was impossible for so many others? The first reports were met with skepticism. The Accord dismissed it as a bizarre anomaly, nothing more than a lucky break. But as more human expeditions returned, the truth began to settle in. Humans were adapting to these harsh environments faster than anyone thought possible. One expedition brought back not just resources, but an entire ecosystem. They had bioengineered crops that grew in soil no other species could have survived in. They had developed technologies that utilized the very elements that other species deemed dangerous. They didn't have superior technology, but they had mastered the art of improvisation. In a secluded conference room, hidden away from the public eye, the High Council of the Galactic Accord met in secret. The first discussion started with cautious curiosity. Could humanity really be as resourceful as it seemed? Some doubted it. But there was one thing they couldn't ignore. The humans weren't just surviving. They were progressing. Slowly but surely, they were proving that the galaxy's underestimation of them was a grave mistake. The edge of space, the place where no other species dared venture, had become humanity's playground. The human race wasn't just surviving the impossible. They were mastering it. But as the first real glimmers of human potential began to show, the galaxy's laugh would slowly turn to unease. The more the galaxy observed humanity, the more questions arose. At first, it was simple curiosity. The humans were fascinating in their own chaotic, unpredictable way. Their technology, though primitive by galactic standards, had taken unexpected leaps. Their innovations, while crude, worked. In the halls of the Galactic Accord's scientific councils, the topic of humans shifted from a joke to something else entirely: interest. It all started with a simple invitation. The Zyder, an advanced species known for their near-infallible engineering, invited a group of human engineers to attend a conference on technological innovation. The humans, eager to prove themselves, accepted without hesitation. They knew they were out of their depth, but they were determined to learn, and, if necessary, show the galaxy that they were not as far behind as they seemed. The Zyder, known for their calm demeanor and meticulously crafted designs, didn't expect much from the human delegation. They set them up in a corner, handed them their presentation materials, and expected nothing more than polite applause. But the humans were different. They didn't stand there in awe. They didn't worship the sleek, perfect designs of the Zyder's creations. Instead, they asked questions. They pointed out flaws. They noticed small inconsistencies that the Zyder had overlooked. They were curious, but more than that, they were relentless. It was during the third day of the conference that the first human breakthrough came. A Zyder starship was experiencing strange issues with its propulsion system. The Zyder engineers, having spent decades perfecting the system, were stumped. The humans, with no formal training in interstellar propulsion, immediately jumped in. They didn't have the Zyder's vast archives of knowledge. They didn't have their centuries of refined methods. But they had ideas, and they weren't afraid to experiment. Within hours, a small team of human engineers had patched together a solution, a stopgap, a quick fix, using basic tools and their own brand of ingenuity. The Zyder, who had never imagined that such a simple solution could exist, watched in stunned silence as the human engineers solved the problem in ways they hadn't considered. The humans didn't just repair the starship. They had sparked a fire. The Zyder engineers, the galactic elites who had long assumed their supremacy in all things technical, felt something for the first time in centuries: doubt. The following weeks saw a flurry of human engineers presenting more innovations. They devised ways to extend energy sources in the most inhospitable environments. They created hybrid systems that used incompatible technology and made it work when the galactic standard had always said it was impossible. They didn't just replicate existing designs. They found new paths, new solutions that nobody had considered. As word spread across the galaxy, what had started as simple curiosity turned into something far more dangerous: a quiet, creeping fear. The humans were onto something. They were taking the galaxy's pristine, perfected systems and bending them to their will. There was a growing realization. Humanity didn't just adapt to challenges. They'd redefine them. And as the whispers of human ingenuity echoed through the halls of galactic power, one thing became clear to those who had once laughed at them. The humans were no longer a joke. They were a puzzle, and no one was sure how to solve them. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long. It had been easy to dismiss them as weak, flawed, and out of place in the cosmic order. But one powerful species, the Velith, made the mistake of treating humanity like just another minor annoyance. The Velith had long seen themselves as the dominant force in the galaxy. An ancient, war-hardened race with vast fleets and unmatched firepower. They had their rules, their empire, and they liked things orderly. And the humans, with their chaotic, unpredictable nature, simply didn't fit. When the Velith made the decision to teach Earth a lesson, to show the humans their place in the galaxy, they didn't expect resistance. They had dealt with unruly species before, crushing rebellions, silencing dissent, and maintaining control through fear. The humans, after all, were still seen as little more than a sideshow. A weak, vulnerable species with no military prowess. It began with a subtle warning. The Velith sent an elite fleet to Earth's border worlds, imposing sanctions, demanding compliance. The human colonies had no chance against the sheer might of the Velith warships. The message was clear: fall in line or face annihilation. The Velith had expected Earth to buckle under the pressure, to cower and submit as countless species had done before them. But humanity was different. The humans, in their typical fashion, didn't respond with the expected surrender. Instead, they fought back. They didn't have the firepower of the Velith, not by a long shot, but what they lacked in strength, they made up for with something the Velith couldn't account for: strategy. Humans, when pushed to the edge, didn't act out of desperation. They acted out of necessity. They were innovators, and they would do whatever it took to survive. Human military leaders immediately called on every advantage they could muster. Their knowledge of the terrain, their ability to adapt technologies on the fly, and their sheer tenacity. They launched guerrilla attacks, sabotaged supply lines, and used alien tech in ways it was never intended to be used. They fought like cornered animals, not with raw power, but with an underdog's cleverness. The first strike caught the Velith by surprise. They thought it would be a simple operation: sweep in, crush the colonies, and leave. Instead, their fleet encountered an enemy they hadn't expected. An enemy that refused to die. The humans' unorthodox tactics disrupted their carefully planned strategies. The human resistance didn't stand a chance in a direct battle, but they fought smart, hitting hard and fast, disappearing into the shadows before the Velith could respond. The Velith weren't prepared for the level of creativity and resourcefulness they faced. They made a critical misstep. They underestimated the humans' will to fight. What started as a calculated strike to put Earth back in its place turned into a nightmare for the Velith. The final blow came when a small group of human ships, using stolen Velith technology, managed to infiltrate the flagship of the Velith's invasion fleet. A surprise attack. Devastating, precise, and fast. The Velith flagship, a symbol of their power, was crippled in an instant. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had struck back. And they had won. The Velith's retreat was swift, and the galaxy watched in stunned silence. Earth had done the impossible, not by power, but by sheer will and ingenuity. And for the first time, the galaxy understood. The humans were not to be laughed at. They were not a joke. They were a force to be reckoned with. The victory over the Velith was not just a battle won. It was the birth of something far more significant. The galaxy had been forced to reckon with humanity's unpredictability, resourcefulness, and stubbornness. What had once been seen as humanity's weakness, their refusal to conform, their chaotic nature, had become their greatest strength. And Earth was about to show the galaxy exactly how powerful that strength could be. As Earth's influence grew, humanity began reaching out to the overlooked, the forgotten, and the discarded species of the galaxy. The ones other empires had written off as irrelevant or unworthy. These species, whether they were refugees from fallen worlds, mercenaries without a home, or oppressed peoples, were the unwanted, cast aside by the polished, powerful empires of the Galactic Accord. But humanity saw something different in them. They saw potential. They saw allies who could be molded into a force unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The first of these alliances formed in the aftermath of the Velith debacle. The human diplomats, skilled in the art of negotiation and leveraging their reputation as fierce fighters, began to unite the outcasts of the galaxy. In the shadows of the galactic hierarchy, they forged secret pacts with species that had long been treated as second-class citizens, a race of telepathic outcasts, brutalized by their more powerful neighbors. A band of scavengers from a broken empire, skilled in ship repair, but never given the opportunity to thrive. A nomadic species that had once been enslaved and forgotten. Each of these species had a unique set of skills and strengths, but no one had ever thought to unite them. No one had seen their value, until humanity did. And so, under the banner of Earth's growing federation, the unwanted began to rise. These species, united by their shared status as the galaxy's rejects, became something greater than they had ever been before. Humanity didn't just offer them protection, they gave them purpose. They weren't just allies in a war for survival, they were partners in reshaping the galaxy. With human leadership, these once powerless species began to realize their full potential. The scavengers became expert engineers, designing ships and weapons no other empire could replicate. The telepathic species began to develop strategies that could outmaneuver even the most advanced military minds of the Accord. The nomads became guerrilla fighters, striking swiftly and with purpose. Together, they formed a formidable force, one that was unbound by the rules and expectations of the old galactic powers. The Accord watched with increasing unease as this new alliance grew in strength and influence. What had started as a small, overlooked faction of the galaxy's underdogs had now become an organized, unstoppable force. The rise of humanity and its coalition was no longer a distant threat. It was an imminent reality. The galaxy's elites had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated the human drive to unite the fractured and the broken. And now, the unwanted were rising, not to serve, but to lead. Humanity had once been the joke of the stars. Now, they were the architects of a new galactic order, one built on the strength of those who had once been discarded. And the galaxy would never be the same again. As humanity's influence continued to spread, the Galactic Accord found itself in a position it had never anticipated. On the defensive, the once untouchable superpowers, the ones who had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, now found themselves wary of the humans and their growing coalition. What had begun as a few isolated incidents, the Velith debacle, the unexpected rise of Earth's underdogs, had evolved into a full-fledged challenge to the established order. The Accord's leaders could no longer ignore the human threat. In secret, the Galactic Council convened. A series of closed-door meetings took place on their most secure worlds, away from the prying eyes of the public and the growing unrest among the outcasts. The elites discussed their options, weighed their strategies, and ultimately came to a disturbing conclusion. The humans were no longer a passing inconvenience. Earth and its allies were a legitimate, dangerous force, and something had to be done before they gained too much power. The first response was economic pressure. A full-scale trade embargo was imposed on Earth, a calculated move to starve humanity of the resources it needed to sustain its expansion. The Accord hoped that by crippling Earth's economy, they could force them back into submission. Yet, humanity responded with unexpected ingenuity. They didn't flinch in the face of the embargo. Instead, they adapted. They began to develop black market economies, forming trade routes outside of the Council's reach. They even began creating their own currency, one backed by their rapidly advancing technology. The next step was more direct. The Accord unleashed a wave of covert operations, sending assassins to eliminate key human leaders, trying to destabilize Earth's growing influence. But humanity's intelligence networks were better than anyone realized. They intercepted and dismantled the covert missions before they could even take root. The humans had learned from their own history of conflict. They knew how to protect their own, how to organize in the face of adversity. Each assassination attempt only strengthened their resolve. Frustration began to mount within the Council. The elite species who had long ruled the galaxy were accustomed to having their will obeyed. They were not used to being thwarted, but even as their resources dwindled, their options became more desperate. In one final attempt to break humanity's growing power, the Galactic Accord made its last gamble, a formal military strike. They would target Earth directly. Their fleets, bolstered by their strongest allies, would march on the human homeworld, intending to wipe out their capital and decimate their military. It was a plan decades in the making, and the Accord was convinced that this time they would finally put an end to the humans once and for all. But what the Accord didn't anticipate was that humanity had already prepared for this very moment. Earth's coalition, composed of species once dismissed and discarded, was not simply surviving. They were thriving. The human ingenuity that had already turned the tide against the Velith was now applied to the most devastating defense network the galaxy had ever seen. They had anticipated the Council's move, and they were ready. As the Accord's fleet gathered in orbit, preparing for its final assault, it became clear that this would not be the easy victory they had predicted. They had made the fatal mistake of believing they could control the humans. And now, they were about to face the consequences. The day of the final confrontation arrived. The Galactic Accord's fleets, drawn from the most powerful empires in the galaxy, formed a blockade around Earth. It was a show of strength, a move that was meant to send a message. Humanity was out of its league. The attack would begin as soon as the last ships were in position, a massive coordinated assault that would cripple Earth's defenses in one fell swoop. But what the Accord didn't know was that humanity had already turned their homeworld into a fortress. In the weeks leading up to the assault, Earth's engineers, soldiers, and their allies had been hard at work. The planet's surface had been covered with a series of advanced defenses: gravity wells, ion disruptors, energy shields, technologies once thought impossible to implement on such a large scale. These systems had been designed using not just human ingenuity, but the combined expertise of every species within their growing coalition. From the scavengers who had rebuilt ancient alien tech to the telepathic species who developed new forms of psychic warfare, Earth was no longer the weak, defenseless world the Accord had once mocked. The battle began in the cold silence of space, with the Accord's ships entering Earth's orbit, preparing to unleash their firepower. The first salvo, a volley of devastating energy blasts, collided with Earth's outer shields. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the shield would give way. But then something unexpected happened. The shields absorbed the impact, adapted, and reinforced themselves. The Accord's shockwaves had no effect. Then the counterattack began. Human ships, sleek and agile, emerged from hidden stations and underground launch bays. They were not the massive warships of the Accord, but they didn't need to be. They were fast, nimble, and packed with weapons that had never been seen before. The humans had developed a new class of stealth fighters that used advanced cloaking technology and unpredictable movement patterns to avoid detection. The first waves of Accord ships were hit before they even knew what was happening. Entire fleets vanished in a single, calculated strike. The Accord's admiral, a battle-hardened leader who had seen the destruction of countless civilizations, watched in disbelief as his ships were picked apart by the human forces. This wasn't how the battle was supposed to go. The human resistance was supposed to be crushed. Yet here they were, outmaneuvering, outthinking, and outfighting a force many times their size. On the ground, Earth's allied species joined the fight. The telepathic species waged psychic warfare, scrambling the minds of the invading troops, causing mass confusion and fear within the ranks of the Accord. The scavengers launched guerrilla attacks, hitting key infrastructure and causing chaos on the enemy supply lines. Even the nomads, once scattered and fractured, fought with a unity and ferocity that the Accord could never have predicted. By the time the first wave of human fighters reached the flagship of the Accord's fleet, the balance of power had already shifted. The fleet, once a symbol of galactic dominance, was now a target. A well-placed strike to the flagship's core destabilized its engines, causing a massive explosion that sent shockwaves through the fleet. The Accord's forces, once sure of their victory, were now in full retreat. For the first time, the galaxy's elites realized what they had failed to understand for so long. Humanity was not a joke. Earth's will to survive, its ability to innovate, and its capacity for unity in the face of overwhelming odds had changed everything. The battle was over. The humans had won. But the galaxy had also learned something else, a lesson far more powerful than any weapon. Never underestimate the humans. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy was left in a stunned silence. The once mighty Galactic Accord, the group that had governed the stars for centuries, had been forced into retreat, their fleets shattered and their pride wounded. Earth, and its now legendary coalition of outcasts, had triumphed in a way no one had expected. But this victory was more than just a military success. It was the dawn of a new era. Humanity's rise was not simply the result of technological innovation or military strategy. It was the culmination of something deeper, a force that transcended the boundaries of their planets and species. It was humanity's unwavering belief that they had the right to define their own future. Earth had never been content to simply survive. Humanity had always strived to thrive, to push forward against the odds, to grow and learn from every failure. And now, the galaxy was forced to reckon with that tenacity. In the days following the battle, the Galactic Accord began to fracture. The once strong empires that had formed its backbone were now left scrambling, questioning how they could maintain their power in the face of a force like humanity. And the rest of the galaxy, long oppressed and ignored by the so-called elites, saw an opportunity. The coalition formed by humanity became a beacon of hope, not just for Earth, but for all the forgotten species that had long been pushed to the margins. Human leaders, recognizing the opportunity before them, began to extend an olive branch. They offered not just peace, but a chance for others to join their growing alliance. They extended invitations to worlds previously ignored by the Galactic Accord, the marginalized, the oppressed, the broken, asking them to join in shaping the future of the galaxy. It was not an offer of domination or conquest, but a vision of a new galactic order, one where no species, no matter how small or disregarded, would be left behind. This vision, this radical shift in the galaxy's power dynamics, began to take shape. The once rigid structure of the Galactic Accord started to crumble as more and more species came to Earth's side. The coalition grew, not just in size, but in influence. The humans were no longer the underdogs, the newcomers. They were now the leaders of something greater, a galaxy that was finally starting to realize its potential for unity, not division. The first truly unified council of the galaxy was formed, with representatives from all corners of space. Earth was at its heart, but it was no longer alone. The once overlooked species now had a voice, and together, they worked to establish new laws, new agreements, and new opportunities for all. Gone were the days of arrogance and oppression. In their place was a new spirit of cooperation and progress. The age of the powerful elite was over, replaced by a new dawn, a galactic era defined by collaboration and shared growth. Humanity had proven its worth, not just by surviving against impossible odds, but by showing the galaxy a new way of thinking. The galaxy was no longer divided by its differences. It had become something greater. It had become unified. And Earth, once the punchline of the galaxy, had become its apex predator, not through might alone, but through the strength of its unity, its innovation, and its undying will to overcome.